Hey everyone, it's Lonnie Sanders again, and I just wanted to kind of finish up this series that I'm doing on Dr. Steinberg's book on adolescence, the adolescent brain. Just talking about reimagining school and just a few things to think about as we go forward. And I'll add more to these later and give a little bit more detail, but a few things that I just think are important for us to understand. And that's when we talk about high school and what does that look like. A few things that we need to know is that there are educational issues in America, and we fall below the average in some categories. But the interesting thing is when we look at these assessments, we actually don't fall behind until high school. In elementary, we actually score near the top. In middle school, we're about average, the international average. High school is where we see the drop, especially in things like math and science. And so it's interesting is what leads us to that point, right? What makes that drop? And so academically, we score lower than the average internationally. But here's the interesting thing. Socially, we beat all other countries except for Germany. And so really in America, school is for socializing. And I think one thing that comes out in the book that we talk about is in America, school really is devalued. Education is devalued. I hear parents talk about it, kids talk about it, and there's a devaluing of education, which is really sad and really scary. And because they devalue education, kids really do just show up to school so that they can be the social aspect, and they don't care as much about grades and that success, which means that they're looking for that dopamine squirt, right? That immediate reward. What do I get now? And so it's interesting because you would think like Asian countries where there's immense pressure and stress on kids to succeed would have high suicide rates. The United States actually has the highest suicide rates for adolescents, even though we don't have that same stress. So it's because we're not teaching those skills, I think, of how to handle those things and how to deal with those things. And so it was an interesting thing to look at that statistic. Another thing to look at that's interesting is that 80% of foreign students who come here to study say that their school back home was harder, more rigorous. And the vast majority of American students who study abroad agree with them. And so this tells us that really American schools, when we get to the high school level, that maybe we're not as rigorous. We don't have as high of expectations, right? It's a little easier for them. And so these kids get bored. It's a little bit too easy. They're not being pushed. Now, an important factor to understand here is if parents are not pushing their kids, if there's not an expectation from parents, then it really limits what we as teachers and education can accomplish, right? We need parents to be actively involved and to be pushing that. And without that parental involvement, it becomes really challenging for us. So parents play a huge role in that. Other interesting things with this is that the voucher system, right? Giving people an opportunity to choose their school through vouchers actually have no impact on the overall scores. And typically why that's true is those that go to the voucher system, you may look at the scores immediately and say, well, all those kids score really high. Well, it's because those parents are actively involved. That's one of the big keys, is those parents are actively involved. They're part of what's going on. And so it's really the parent involvement that's the big factor there. Parent involvement is a bigger factor than quality of the teacher even. So having parents that are pushing that. So vouchers really don't have a big impact. It's not a lack of money. Right? Schools in the US get more funding than most other schools. Students in America actually spend more time in a classroom than in other countries. It's not a stress issues because, like I said, you know, the stress is no more. In fact, the rigor is typically seen as easier when other people look at it. So parents are the key. It really is. It's hard to argue a lot of other cases. If parents don't raise their children in ways that enable them to maintain interest and in what their teachers are teaching, it doesn't matter who the teachers are, how they teach, what they teach, or how much they're paid. That's from Dr. Steinberg in the chapter on Reimagining High School. And so he talks about changing the culture of student achievement. Changes in instruction or instruction won't or can't make a difference if we don't have that buy-in from parents and parents are teaching kids that school is about learning and not about social. And so that's the difference. In other cultures, school is very much revered, that's very respected, and there's an expectation there. And so it's interesting how that works. And so basically what we learn from this is that people are successful in other countries typically because their kids are working harder. And so the kids who work harder typically have more success, which interestingly enough goes with all the other stuff we've been talking about, right? Resilience, determination, grit. Those are the things that lead us to success, self-regulation. And so a few things when we talk about this is a lot of the experts agree that schools should focus on fostering more general competencies that have value in different work settings. In other words, we're not going to limit to just some of the academic stuff. We're going to look at being able to help them to be able to work efficiently and effectively with others, being able to learn how to develop and carry out long-term strategic plans, know how to acquire and use new information. I know my students struggle with that. We do a lot of research in history, and it seems like they struggle with that. Being able to think flexibly, right, and creatively, and have that self-regulation and put the effort in. This is actually what employers are looking for more than anything else. Is those skills are valuable in these professional occupations and today's world, and are what going to lead to success. And so in the past, working class parents really were more of an autocratic approach. My kids need to learn this because they're going to go work in a factory, but things have changed. And so we're growing up in a different environment where different skills are needed. And so we have to work on that. And so a couple of things, is character education the answer? They use the Knowledge and Power program, or KIP. And they have a bunch of charter schools, and they bragged about how great they were and how much they succeeded. The challenge with seeing if that really worked or not is that it was a program in which parents had to actively do things to put their kids in. So once again, we're talking about the parents that are actively involved. And so was it useful or not? It's hard to tell because of that. But so what can we do? We kind of look into neuroscience a little bit. And so we want to look at techniques for improving higher order cognitive skills, what we call executive functions. These are those functions that are going to help them with self-regulation, help them to push through and to accomplish tasks and things that are difficult. And so what can we do to strengthen that self-regulation? What can we do to help make those positive connections? And so Dr. Steinberg talks about that the most promising efforts fall into 5 categories. One is exercises designed to improve one or more specific aspects of executive functioning. Practices devoted to increasing mindfulness, aerobic exercise, physical regimens that require intense concentration, and specific strategies designed to boost self-control, right? To help delay gratification. And so each of these have different abilities. So training executive function is things like working on working memory. So working memory is that ability to retain information, but keeping it, right, as part of a long sentence in mind while you finish reading it, something like that. And so constantly working to help them understand working memory. And so there's lots of tasks that we can do with that. And so this is important for learning things like music, math. So this is going to help with those skills. Mindfulness meditation. And this involves focusing your attention on the present moment in a non-judgmental fashion. So it's the ability to really focus on something right now, to relax, to take a breath, right? It helps to reduce stress. We pay attention to something very specific right now and kind of let everything go. And it's been proven to really help with trauma and anxiety and to calm people down. Aerobic exercise. It's interesting that exercise and movement improve self-regulation. He does talk about, though, that the data is very limited here, but it does show some promise that maybe that pursuit aerobic exercise can help. And then other things like mindful physical activity. So this is that activity of including a challenging physical activity with mindfulness, something like yoga, martial arts, taekwondo. I know for my daughter, it really helped her focus herself when we put her in taekwondo, and it helped her to be really successful and to be able to make those decisions. So I can see where that could be a positive thing. And then teaching self-regulation strategies. We're going to teach strategies that help them to control their emotions, right? To control anxiety, to manage stress, right? Consider other people's feelings. And so we want to find those ways that we can do that. And so things like finding effective programs and activities that allow for a specific order to build certain tasks. To become active, to work hard, to build certain strategies to so that we can manage that stress, so that we can control that emotion before it just bursts out. And so these are some very important things that we do. Mental contrasting with implementation intention, so it's MCII. And so this is students who are asked to describe a positive academic goal for the semester, and they fantasize a bit about what it would be like to get that. Maybe you get an allowance from your parents or whatever. And then they can think of potential obstacles. So what is going to be what's the challenge? And then they make a plan for working on that, right? And then the other thing that's important is that we have sustained scaffold stimulation. So in other words, when you teach, when we do things, it has to be stimulating. So in other words, it has to be rigorous. It has to have some challenge to it. Now, it doesn't have to be so hard and demanding. It can't be so hard and demanding that they can't do it, but it should have some challenge to it. Now, for some students, it's maybe fun. For a lot of students, it probably won't, but it still has to be challenging. The second, it needs to be scaffold. So we build one step and then the next step and then the next step. And these steps are not so big that it's not able for them to make those jumps. We think of baby steps, right? Small, consistent steps to where they're challenged a little bit and they rise to that challenge and they rise to the next challenge. And the scaffolding really helps them to build these skills that are necessary. And it's something as teachers that we do all the time. And then lastly, something that can be sustained over time through deliberate practice. And so it's something that we do consistently, right? Repetition. And so we're always putting this in. And so these are just some things when we talk about reimagining school that we want to start taking and trying to help teenagers build skills that help them with self-regulation, that put responsibility on them. And that's hard for us as teachers because we like to have control, right? So we kind of have to start giving up some of that control and put the responsibility in their hands. And so by doing these things, we can help them to build that self-control, that self-regulation, right? Create those breaks that slow them down from making bad choices. And by doing that, we're building skills to help them long-term in life. And so it's really important that we do that and find ways to do that to meet our students' needs, because it's going to help them long-term. Yes, there's a lot of environmental factors that we can't work with, right? That we can't change. I can't change for the most part what the parents are going to do. There's a lot of things that kids are exposed to outside of school that I can't change, but I can work on giving them the best environment here to try to help them develop those proper skills. And that's our challenge. And so it's one of those things that we continue to work on and continue to look at research and what are ways that we can really help these students succeed and get these traits that are positive. So if you have ideas, if you have thoughts, please feel free to put them in the comment section. I'd love to hear what you have to think. And as I continue to look through and study some of this, I'll post some follow-up videos and some different strategies and things that I will put in my actual classroom, and you'll be able to see kind of what their success looks like. So once again, I'm Laurence Steinberg, and this is today we were talking about reimagining schools from the book Age of Opportunity by Dr. Laurence Steinberg. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. Have a good day, and thanks for joining us. Bye.